What happens when the very person trusted to guide hundreds of lives safely through the sky is suddenly told she doesn't belong? What if a respected black female pilot, in full uniform, ready to command her aircraft, is accused of impersonation by her own crew on an ordinary night flight? Captain Maya Johnson boarded expecting routine skies, but what followed was anything but ordinary. A confrontation at 30,000 feet. Passengers divided, voices raised, and dignity stripped in front of an entire cabin. What began as humiliation for one woman spiraled into chaos that would shake an entire airline to its core. How far would prejudice go when hidden behind a smile? How much courage does it take to stand firm when the world demands you sit down? And what happens when the truth, once exposed, spreads faster than the jet itself tonight? You'll hear the story of one flight that became a reckoning, a story of dignity, of justice, and of a woman who refused to be silenced. If you believe stories like this must be told, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Now let's take our seats, fasten our belts, and step into the story. The words came softly at first, but with an edge sharp enough to cut through the quiet hum of the first-class cabin. Ma'am, this area is for crew only. You need to return to your seat. Captain Maya Johnson froze in the aisle. Her 4 gold stripes glimmered faintly under the overhead lights as she adjusted the handle of her black leather briefcase. She had been making her way toward the cockpit, ready to prepare for the long flight from Los Angeles to New York, when a beverage cart rolled sideways to block her path. Behind it stood Evelyn Carter, a flight attendant with perfect hair pinned tight and a pair of skeptical eyes that scanned Maya from head to toe. "Excuse me." Maya's voice remained calm, almost melodic, though inside her chest she felt a familiar pressure rising, the quiet sting of being underestimated yet again. Evelyn crossed her arms. "Passengers aren't allowed up here. I don't care what kind of costume you've put together." Her tone was loud enough for nearby passengers to hear. Maya glanced down at herself. Navy blue uniform, polished black shoes, and a captain's badge that had been hers for nearly 2 decades. The irony bit at her. Here she was, one of the most qualified people in the entire aircraft, treated like an intruder. A boy in seat 2A, Daniel Brooks, maybe 17 at most, fumbled for his phone. He tilted the camera just above the seat back, whispering into it like a reporter breaking news. "Yo, guys, you seeing this flight attendants blocking a pilot? This is wild." The red dot blinked on his screen. Live. 12 people were already tuned in. Maya inhaled slowly, pulling her shoulders back. She had learned long ago that control began with breath. "I'm Captain Johnson," she said evenly. "This is Flight 828 service to New York. I am assigned to fly this aircraft tonight." But Evelyn didn't budge. Her hand tightened around the beverage cart like it was a shield. "Nice story, but real pilots don't look like you." The words hit the air heavy, landing like a stone dropped in still water. Ripples of discomfort spread through the cabin. A businessman in seat 1C lowered his newspaper, his brow furrowing. A woman across the aisle leaned forward, curiosity sharpening her gaze. Maya felt heat crawl up the back of her neck, but her expression never wavered. She had heard variations of this line her entire career. Real pilots don't look like you. Real executives don't look like you. Real leaders don't look like you. And every time, she had answered not with anger, but with proof. She reached into her jacket pocket and withdrew her credentials, polished and current, bearing the insignia of the airline. She held them out for Evelyn to inspect. Evelyn glanced once, then smirked. "A fake ID, too. You really went all out for this costume, didn't you?" She turned to the watching passengers, her voice now projecting. "Don't worry, folks. We'll have this handled in a moment." Phones appeared like fireflies in the dark. Small rectangles glowing as people raised them discreetly, or not so discreetly, to capture what was unfolding. Daniel's live stream viewer count ticked up to 25. Comments began to flash across the bottom. "She's wearing the stripes. Are you serious right now? This is straight-up discrimination." The cabin air seemed to thicken, pressing down on Maya's chest. She stood perfectly still, her eyes locked on Evelyn's, refusing to let them waver. Inside, though, her mind was a storm. Not again. Not here. Not in front of an entire plane. She thought of the years she had sacrificed early mornings, nights away from family, endless training hours in simulators that hummed like second homes. She thought of the Harvard MBA she had pursued after midnight flights, textbooks open under hotel lamps, and she thought of the promises she had made to herself that she would always carry herself with dignity, no matter how many doors slammed in her face. But tonight, this door was literal, and it was being held shut by someone who believed her very presence was a threat. "Miss," Maya said, deliberately using the same formal tone Evelyn had used with her, "I need you to move this cart so I can reach the cockpit. We are scheduled to depart in 30 minutes. Evelyn gave a short, sharp laugh. "You're not going anywhere except back to your seat, or off this plane." Daniel's voice whispered into his phone. "Yo, she's tripping. She's blocking the actual pilot. Y'all need to share this." His viewer count ticked up again, now over 40. The internet smelled drama, and it was hungry. Maya could feel the cabin tipping into chaos, a precarious balance between truth and spectacle. She glanced at Richard Bennett in 1C, who now sat up fully, folding his paper. His eyes were on her, steady, respectful, questioning. Then Linda Parker, the woman in 2B, spoke up, her voice cutting through the tension. "Young lady," she addressed Evelyn, "that woman has done nothing but act professional. Maybe you should check your attitude before you embarrass this airline further." Evelyn's face flushed, but she held her ground. "Ma'am, with all due respect, it's my job to protect this cabin. We can't just have random people wandering around in uniforms." "Random people," Linda snapped. "Look at her. She's clearly qualified." Maya let the exchange swirl around her, though her heart pounded against her ribs. She had been here before, in meetings where her voice was doubted, in briefings where her expertise was ignored, but never quite like this, never with an entire cabin watching, recording, judging. And beneath it all, something else stirred. A quiet resolve. Because this was no longer just about her. This was about every pilot who had been questioned, every professional who had been told they didn't belong, every moment of bias disguised as procedure. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. A message flashed across the screen from Anthony Rivera. The airline CFO board meeting moved to 3 p.m. New policy draft ready. The irony nearly made her laugh out loud. Here she was, scheduled to present anti-discrimination reforms later today, living out the very reason they were needed. She slipped the phone back, her eyes never leaving Evelyn's. "You're making a mistake," she said quietly. Evelyn arched an eyebrow. "We'll see about that." The silence that followed was electric. The passengers leaned forward. Phones recorded. And Maya stood still, her dignity unshaken, even as the storm gathered around her. The cabin lights glowed soft and golden, yet the atmosphere had turned brittle. Every shift of fabric, every cough or click of a phone camera felt amplified. Captain Maya Johnson stood rooted in place, her briefcase by her side, the stripes on her sleeve catching the faintest glint of light. Evelyn Carter still blocked her path, shoulders squared, eyes narrowed in suspicion that bordered on hostility. Maya's voice was measured when she spoke. "Ms. Carter, I'm not a passenger. I'm scheduled to command this flight. If you would kindly step aside, I can take my position in the cockpit." Evelyn shook her head. "Enough with the story. I don't care how convincing the outfit is. You're not going to waltz up to the flight deck pretending to be a captain. Not on my watch." Her words were deliberately loud, carrying to every row in first class. A few passengers whispered among themselves, some leaning closer for a better view. Others had phones tilted at just the right angle, recording without shame. Daniel Brooks in 2A whispered into his live stream like a commentator narrating a boxing match. "Y'all hearing this? She's saying the captain is fake. This is insane. We got like 60 people watching right now. Keep sharing." Maya felt the eyes of the cabin pierce into her, but she steadied her breath. She had always believed composure was her armor. Raising her voice, meeting aggression with aggression, would not win the respect she had worked decades to earn. But she could not ignore the creeping dread that perhaps, no matter her uniform or credentials, some people would never see her as legitimate. "Ms. Carter," she said again, this time lowering her tone so that only Evelyn and the nearest passengers could hear. "I have flown for this airline for 23 years. I am licensed to command international routes. I am the captain assigned to this flight. Please, don't escalate this further." Evelyn's smirk deepened. "You think dropping some big numbers makes you believable? Anyone can memorize facts. Next thing you'll be quoting plane models and pretending you flew them." Richard Bennett, the businessman in 1C, could no longer contain himself. He pushed his paper aside and leaned forward. "Excuse me, but she's clearly a pilot. Look at her. Look at the uniform. Are you telling me you can't even recognize your own crew?" Evelyn's eyes flashed as if his interjection offended her authority. "Sir, please remain seated. I am following protocol. We cannot have impersonators endangering this flight." Linda Parker in 2B leaned forward too, her voice calm but firm. "Protocol is one thing. Insulting a professional woman doing her job is another. You're out of line, young lady." The exchange rippled through the cabin like a sudden gust of wind. Some passengers nodded in agreement. Others shrank back into their seats, unwilling to get involved. Phones continued to capture every second. Daniel's viewer count ticked higher, 89, then 112. Comments scrolled across his screen. "Bruh, this is racist as hell. Look at her face. She's embarrassed but still calm. Somebody call the news. This needs to be seen." Maya drew a slow breath, clutching her briefcase tighter. She wanted to shout, to lay bare her resume, her Harvard MBA, the thousands of flight hours logged in every kind of aircraft. She wanted to hold up the countless commendations she had received for handling emergencies with poise, but she swallowed the urge. None of that mattered right now. Not to Evelyn. The only thing Evelyn seemed to see was a black woman standing where she believed a black woman didn't belong. Inside. Maya's heart ached. How many more times would she have to prove herself? How many more walls would she have to climb? Walls built not of steel or regulation, but of perception, of bias carved deep into the industry she loved. "Carter," she said once more, keeping her tone patient. "I am Captain Johnson. This is Flight 828 to New York. We are on a schedule, and I intend to ensure this aircraft departs on time." Evelyn crossed her arms. blocking the aisle like a sentry at a fortress gate. "You're not fooling me. Real pilots don't look like you, and they sure don't sound like you either." The words cracked like a whip in the hushed cabin. For a heartbeat, silence reigned. Even the hum of the engine seemed to fade. The businessman's jaw clenched visibly. Linda's hands tightened around the armrests of her seat. Daniel's camera zoomed closer, capturing the sting of the remark. Maya stood still. Her pulse thundered in her ears, but her expression remained carved in stone. That sentence would echo far beyond this cabin. It wasn't just a dismissal. It was an erasure, a denial of everything she had fought for. And yet, here it was, spoken so casually, as if it were truth. George Whitman, the elderly gentleman in 1D, stood up slowly, leaning on his cane. His voice was gravelly, worn by decades of life. "I've been flying for 60 years, young lady. I've seen pilots come and go, and I can tell you right now, that woman has more professionalism in her stance than you've shown in this entire exchange." A murmur of agreement swept through a portion of the cabin. Evelyn's face flushed crimson, but she tried to mask it with forced authority. "Sir, please, sit down. I am handling this according to regulation." George's gaze sharpened, unwavering. Regulation doesn't require you to humiliate a professional. Regulation doesn't demand you insult her background. That's your choice, and it's the wrong one. Evelyn's lips pressed into a thin line. She gripped the beverage cart harder, though her knuckles whitened. Maya could see it now, the conflict behind her defiance. Evelyn wasn't just following protocol. She was leaning on it like a crutch to justify what she couldn't admit aloud, that she simply didn't believe Maya belonged. Daniel's stream jumped past 200 viewers. Someone in the comments typed, "Clip this. This is going viral." Another read, "This is what people mean when they say systemic bias. It's happening in real time." Maya closed her eyes for a brief second, steadying her breathing again. She could feel the tug of two voices inside her. One urged her to end this charade with the truth she carried in her briefcase. The other urged patience, to let the weight of Evelyn's words expose themselves without her intervention. She had lived through enough battles to know that sometimes silence was louder than speech. But as she opened her eyes, she felt the cabin itself had chosen a side. Richard, Linda, George, even several passengers behind them had begun whispering and shaking their heads at Evelyn's stubbornness. It was no longer a question of whether Maya belonged. The real question was how long Evelyn would continue before the situation broke beyond her control. Evelyn looked around, realizing the eyes of the cabin had shifted. She doubled down. "Ma'am, I'm asking you one last time to return to your seat before I call security." Maya did not move. Her voice was quiet but strong. "And I'm telling you, I am the captain of this flight. You are obstructing me from fulfilling my duties." The standoff crystallized in that moment. The air grew heavier. The silence stretched thinner. Daniel whispered into his phone, his voice trembling with adrenaline. "Yo, we just hit 300 live viewers. People are freaking out. This is insane. We're watching history right now." For Maya, though, it wasn't history. It was life. It was the latest chapter in a book she had been forced to write every day of her career. A book filled with doubts cast by others. Barriers invisible, yet unyielding. But she also knew something Evelyn did not, that she carried within her, not just the authority of a captain, but something far greater, something that could change the course of this confrontation in a heartbeat. Not yet, she told herself. Not yet. Instead, she looked Evelyn straight in the eyes. Then do what you think you must. But know this truth has a way of surfacing, and when it does, you'll wish you had listened. The words lingered in the air, quiet but resonant, and though Evelyn kept her stance, the faint tremor in her jaw betrayed the first crack in her certainty. The cabin waited, breath held, for what would come next. The silence that followed Evelyn's last remark seemed to weigh more than the air itself. It was as if the oxygen had been drained from the cabin, leaving only tension. Captain Maya Johnson did not move, her hand still resting lightly on the handle of her briefcase. Her face betrayed nothing, though her heart pounded hard enough to echo in her ears. Richard Bennett was the first to break the silence. "That's enough," he said firmly, his voice cutting through the heavy air. "You've crossed a line." But Evelyn ignored him. Her eyes stayed locked on Maya, fueled not by authority anymore, but by something deeper and uglier. She spoke louder now, ensuring the entire first-class cabin could hear. "You think just because you bought yourself a uniform and a shiny badge you can fool people. Real captains don't look like you. You probably belong in customer service, or maybe cleaning the cabins after the real crews are done." Gas rippled across the rows. Someone in 3A whispered, "Oh my God," while another passenger muttered under their breath. The remark sliced through the cabin with a cruelty that was impossible to misinterpret. It was no longer a question of protocol or procedure. It was personal. It was about who Maya was, and more importantly, who Evelyn believed she could never be. Daniel Brooks nearly dropped his phone as his live stream exploded. His viewer count leapt past 400, comments flying in so fast he could barely keep up. "Did she just say housekeeping?" one viewer typed. "This is straight-up racism." Another posted, "Keep recording. Don't stop." Daniel angled his camera closer, his young face a mix of shock and determination. For the first time, he realized the responsibility he carried. This was not just entertainment for strangers online. This was evidence. Maya stood perfectly still. Her training told her to remain calm, to absorb every insult without outward reaction. But inside her thoughts were racing. Every insult she had endured over the years, every sideways glance, every patronizing tone from people who assumed she was less capable, came rushing back in a flood. And yet she knew if she lashed out now, even with justification, it would be twisted against her. They would say she was unprofessional, emotional, unfit. She had carried that burden long enough to know the game was rigged, and the only way to win was to play differently. Linda Parker leaned forward, her eyes flashing with anger. "Young lady, do you hear yourself? You're humiliating her in front of all of us. She has carried herself with dignity this entire time, while you've done nothing but insult her." Evelyn snapped back. "Ma'am, I'm doing my job. Security threats come in many forms. Just because someone looks convincing doesn't mean they are. We live in dangerous times. I refuse to let someone trick their way into the cockpit." Trick George Whitman's voice carried more weight than any argument so far. He stood again, his cane steady in his hand, his eyes burning with the wisdom of age. "I've been flying longer than you've been alive. I know a captain when I see one. And this woman is a captain." Evelyn shook her head, but for the first time her voice faltered. "You can't know that for sure. You can't—" "Yes, I can," George replied, "because professionalism is not just a uniform. It's how a person holds themselves when the world turns against them. Look at her. She has more grace under fire than you will ever understand." Several passengers clapped softly, a few nodding in agreement. The mood of the cabin was shifting. What began as passive curiosity was becoming something else, something closer to solidarity. People were no longer just watching. They were choosing sides. Maya took a quiet breath, her mind torn between silence and speech. She wanted desperately to end this humiliation, to pull out the card that would prove everything, to drop her truth like a hammer. But another part of her urged restraint. If she ended it now with a revelation of power, what lesson would be learned? Would Evelyn or anyone else truly reflect on their behavior? Or would they dismiss it as a misunderstanding smoothed over by authority? This wasn't just about winning the confrontation. It was about exposing the poison that lingered quietly beneath the surface. Her inner dialogue pressed hard against her composure. Do you let them strip you of dignity in public just to prove a larger point later? Or do you fight back now, loudly, to protect yourself in the moment? Neither choice felt right. Both came with a cost. She thought of the young women who might one day sit where she stood, facing similar disbelief. If she walked away quietly, would she be failing them? Richard Bennett rose halfway out of his seat, his voice ringing across the cabin. This is absurd. She has shown her credentials, her uniform, her composure. If you remove her, you will be making a mistake that goes far beyond this plane. Think carefully about what you are doing. But Evelyn doubled down, clinging to the authority she thought she still held. Sir, please stay seated. This is not your concern. The businessman's jaw tightened. It is my concern when injustice unfolds in front of me. It becomes all our concern. Daniel's stream viewer count passed 600. Comments exploded. This video needs to go to CNN. We need her name, badge number, everything. Don't let them take her off. The digital tide was turning as swiftly as the mood inside the aircraft. The story was already leaving the walls of the cabin, spreading into a world hungry for proof of prejudice and injustice. Maya's phone buzzed again in her pocket, a subtle vibration against her leg. She knew without checking who it was. Anthony Rivera always had impeccable timing. She resisted the urge to look at the screen. The irony was too thick. Here she was, being told she didn't belong, even as her company's executives prepared for a meeting built around stopping exactly this. Her silence was beginning to speak louder than Evelyn's accusations. Passengers shifted in their seats, murmuring discontent. Some glared openly at Evelyn now, no longer afraid to show their disapproval. A woman from row 3 raised her phone high, live streaming on TikTok. Another passenger held his camera steady, his face stern, as though documenting evidence for a courtroom. Evelyn began to sense the shift, but pride kept her in place. Her cheeks were flushed, her eyes sharp, her hands gripping the cart as if moving it would mean surrender. I will not allow this plane to be jeopardized, she insisted. If I have to call security, I will. Maya spoke then, her tone even softer than before, but with a quiet power that commanded the cabin. You already have jeopardized it. Not the aircraft, not the safety of the passengers, but something greater. Respect, trust, dignity. Every second you continue, you strip this flight of something far more important than minutes on a clock. The words sank into the silence. Even Evelyn blinked, her lips parting, but no words escaping. For a fleeting moment, the veneer of authority cracked, revealing the uncertainty beneath. Daniel whispered again into his phone. Awestruck. Did y'all hear that she's not even yelling? She's just powerful. Damn. The comments scrolled faster than his eyes could follow. People were screen recording, clipping, sharing. The reach was multiplying by the second. Maya felt the cabin watching her, waiting for the next move. Her own internal battle raged louder than the murmurs around her. Every instinct screamed to end it now, to pull rank, to reveal her power. But something deeper whispered that the moment had to play out, that sometimes the exposure of raw prejudice was more powerful than its immediate defeat. Her jaw tightened as she met Evelyn's gaze once more. Call security if you must, but know this: when you do, every single person watching, both here and beyond this cabin, will remember not what I said, but what you chose to say. The stillness that followed was suffocating, broken only by the faint whir of the beverage cart wheels as Evelyn shifted uncomfortably. No one moved. No one dared breathe too loud. They all knew something irreversible had just happened. The tension in the first-class cabin had reached a breaking point. Passengers leaned forward in their seats as though watching a play unfold on stage. Some whispered nervously, while others recorded with steady hands, ensuring not a second was lost. Captain Maya Johnson stood firm, her posture unshaken, while Evelyn Carter held her ground with a mix of stubbornness and thinly veiled panic. It was at that moment the cabin door opened, and Michael Harris, the gate supervisor, stepped inside. His navy blazer carried the insignia of airport operations, his ID clipped neatly to his chest. With 15 years of experience managing gate departures, he carried himself with the authority of someone used to resolving disputes quickly. "What seems to be the problem here?" he asked, his voice brisk but not yet accusatory. Evelyn wasted no time. "We have an impersonator in the cabin. She's wearing a pilot's uniform and refusing to return to her seat. She even presented fake credentials." Michael's eyes moved immediately to Maya. He scanned her uniform, the stripes on her sleeves, the polished briefcase at her side. For a brief second, something flickered across his face, perhaps doubt or hesitation. But he quickly shifted his gaze back to Evelyn, relying on the voice of his subordinate rather than his own eyes. "Ma'am," he said to Maya, "I'm going to need you to step aside until we can sort this out." Richard Bennett bristled in his seat. "This is outrageous. She is obviously the captain. You're making a scene over nothing." Michael raised a hand to silence him. "Sir, please remain seated. We'll take care of this." The words fanned the flames already burning. Linda Parker leaned forward, her face set in quiet fury. "Take care of it by what, humiliating a professional in front of a plane full of passengers? You're already in the wrong." Evelyn's lips curved into a smug smile. She had backup now, and with Michael by her side she seemed emboldened. "Security should be called immediately," she pressed. "We can't delay departure any further." Maya said nothing, though her chest felt tight. She had dealt with prejudice before, but rarely had it grown so public, so unrestrained. She could feel the judgment from those who stayed silent, the way their eyes darted between her and Evelyn, between authority and doubt. Daniel Brooks whispered into his phone again, his live stream viewer count spiking past 800. "We got a supervisor in here now, siding with the flight attendant. They're calling her fake. This is getting crazy." The comments came faster than his voice could keep up. "Don't let them do this. This is discrimination live. Tag the news stations." George Whitman pushed himself up from his seat once more, his cane clicking against the floor. His voice cracked with age, but carried unshakable weight. "I told you before. She's the real captain. Are you blind, or are you just choosing not to see?" Michael frowned, uncomfortable with the open challenge. "Sir, please sit down. I'm handling this according to procedure." George's eyes blazed. "Procedure? Don't talk to me about procedure when you can't even recognize your own captain. What you're doing isn't procedure. It's prejudice." A murmur of agreement rippled through several passengers. Phones lifted higher, capturing every word. What had begun as a misunderstanding was rapidly becoming something larger, something that exposed deeper fault lines. Maya stood still, but inside her thoughts whirled. She felt torn between protecting the schedule, avoiding escalation, and standing firm against an injustice that seemed to grow sharper with each passing second. She thought of her years training, her countless hours in simulators, her moments of triumph in storms and emergencies. And now, in front of an audience of strangers and a swelling online crowd, she was being told none of it mattered. Michael reached for his radio. "Security. We need assistance at Gate C201. Possible impersonator refusing instructions." His words crackled into the device, finalizing the escalation. The cabin erupted in protest. Richard stood now, unable to stay seated. "This is insane. You are about to drag a pilot off her own plane while we all watch." "Sit down," Michael ordered, his patience thinning. "I will not," Richard replied, his voice booming. "And neither should anyone else who knows right from wrong." Linda Parker stood too, her voice rising above the chaos. "This is beyond ridiculous. We all see what's happening. We all see who's being targeted." Evelyn snapped at her. "Ma'am, you're interfering. Please sit before you cause further disruption." "I'll sit when you stop humiliating this woman," Linda shot back. Maya felt the weight of the cabin pressing on her from all sides. Her own silence was both her shield and her torment. She wanted to speak, to take control, but she also understood the power of allowing others to witness the injustice for themselves. Still, she knew once security arrived, the situation could spiral out of her hands entirely. Daniel's livestream hit 1,000 viewers. He swallowed hard, realizing he was holding history in his trembling hands. "They just called security," he whispered. "She's calm. She hasn't done anything. And they're still trying to throw her off. Keep sharing this, please." Passengers in rows behind first class craned their necks to see. A flight attendant from economy peeked discreetly from the curtain, phone in hand, recording quietly. The cabin had transformed from a space of luxury into a theater of conflict, with everyone forced into roles witnesses, defenders, critics, and silent accomplices. Maya's inner voice grew louder. "End this. Reveal who you are. Show them the truth." But another voice countered. "Not yet. Let them reveal themselves fully. Let the world see what lurks beneath their uniforms and procedures." The cabin door opened again, and 2 airport security officers entered. Officer Luis Alvarez and Officer David Turner, both in dark uniforms with radios clipped to their shoulders, surveyed the scene. Their eyes scanned the passengers, then landed on Maya. "What's the situation?" Alvarez asked. Michael stepped forward quickly, eager to assert control. "We have a passenger impersonating crew, refusing to comply. She needs to be removed before departure." Gas filled the cabin. Several passengers shouted in protest. Richard raised his voice above them all. "She is not impersonating anyone. She is your captain, and you're all blind if you can't see that." Alvarez frowned, uncertain. He glanced at Maya, then at Evelyn, then back again. Turner shifted uneasily, as though recognizing something was wrong, but protocol demanded they act, and Michael's authority as gate supervisor weighed on them. "Ma'am," Alvarez said, addressing Maya, "I'm going to need you to come with us until this is sorted out." Maya's heart thudded. Her fingers curled tighter around her briefcase. The storm inside her boiled humiliation, anger, restraint. She imagined herself walking off quietly, sparing herself the spectacle, but leaving behind a wound that would fester in silence. Or she could resist, reveal the truth, and risk everything unraveling here in front of strangers. She breathed deeply, steadying her thoughts. She looked around at the passengers who had risen to her defense, at Daniel with his trembling phone, at the live stream that was already spreading far beyond this cabin. She saw not just a confrontation, but a moment that could echo across lives she would never meet. Her voice was steady, almost serene. "Officers, I understand you have a job to do, but before you escort me anywhere, I ask only one thing. Look carefully. Look at me. Look at the uniform I wear, the stripes I carry, the dignity I have maintained even as I've been insulted. Then ask yourselves who is truly the disruption here." The officers hesitated. Alvarez shifted his weight. Turner glanced at Evelyn, then back at Maya. The silence stretched. Every eye in the cabin fixed on the unfolding scene. The tension had escalated to its breaking point, and no one knew what would happen next. The request from the security officer still hung in the air, heavy and unresolved. Every eye in the cabin locked onto Captain Maya Johnson, waiting to see how she would respond. For a moment, time seemed to slow, each second stretching longer than the last. The engines hummed faintly beneath the floor, a reminder that the flight itself was on hold until this confrontation was resolved. Maya drew in a slow breath. Her training told her to cooperate, to avoid confrontation with airport security, but another part of her resisted. If she stepped off the plane now, if she allowed herself to be escorted out like a criminal, the humiliation would not end here. It would follow her beyond this cabin, and the story told by Evelyn Carter would harden into truth for those who wanted to believe it. Yet she also knew that if she resisted too openly, she risked playing into stereotypes that had haunted her for years. She closed her eyes briefly, then opened them, her gaze calm but unyielding. "Officers, I will comply with whatever is required for the safety of this aircraft. But I need you to understand that I am not a passenger pretending to be someone I am not. I am Captain Maya Johnson, and I am scheduled to command this very flight." The declaration sent ripples through the cabin. Some passengers nodded in solidarity, while others looked away, uncertain how to react. Evelyn's lips curled into a cold smile. She believed she had won. "See," she said to the officers, "still insisting on the story. This is exactly what I warned about." Richard Bennett stood, his face flushed with anger. "For God's sake, are you even listening? She's been nothing but professional while you've insulted her. And now you're trying to throw her off the plane she's meant to fly." "Do you hear yourselves?" Linda Parker added her voice, steady and fierce. "We see the truth. Everyone here sees it. The only ones refusing to see are the ones clinging to power they don't deserve." The officer shifted uneasily. Luis Alvarez cleared his throat. "Ma'am, it's not our job to determine who is telling the truth. We were called here because of a disruption, and we need to resolve it quickly." George Whitman's cane tapped against the floor as he leaned forward, his voice shaking with both age and fury. "The disruption is not her. The disruption is that young woman," he said, pointing directly at Evelyn. "We've all watched her escalate this, insult her, demean her. If anyone deserves to be removed from this cabin, it's her." The passengers murmured their agreement, some clapping softly. Evelyn's cheeks reddened, but she raised her chin higher, unwilling to yield. "I did what any responsible crew member would do. I protected this aircraft." Maya's thoughts churned. The officers' indecision was dangerous. They could tip in either direction, and she had no control over their judgment. Her heart ached with the weight of it. She wanted to reveal everything, to pull out the documents in her briefcase that would erase all doubt. But she also felt the gravity of the moment, the knowledge that letting this play out might expose something deeper about the prejudice simmering under the surface. Inside, her conscience wrestled. If I let this continue, am I sacrificing my own dignity for the sake of a larger truth? Or am I showing strength by enduring what others cannot? She thought of the young cadets she mentored, wide-eyed women who dreamed of flying, but whispered their fears of not belonging. She had always told them that strength was found not in shouting, but in standing firm. But standing firm had never felt so costly. Daniel Brooks adjusted his phone, his voice trembling as he narrated for his growing online audience. She just said it. She's the captain. And they still don't believe her. We're at 1,500 viewers. This is blowing up. His comments flooded with outrage. Protect her. This is history in the making. That flight attendant needs to be fired. The divide inside the cabin grew sharper. On one side, Evelyn and Michael Harris clung to their authority, insisting Maya was a fraud. On the other, passengers rallied around Maya, their voices growing louder, their conviction firmer. The officers stood in the middle, caught between duty and doubt, their hesitation making the silence heavier. Maya spoke again, her tone soft but resonant. Officers, I respect your position. I respect the role you play in ensuring safety. But I ask you to consider something. If I were truly an imposter, would I be standing here calm, unflinching, in front of hundreds of witnesses, or would I have fled the moment I was challenged? Ask yourselves which makes more sense. Her words landed with quiet force. Alvarez's eyes flickered, and even Turner shifted uncomfortably. The silence stretched, and for the first time, Evelyn faltered. Her hand trembled slightly as she gripped the beverage cart, though she masked it with a sneer. "She's manipulating you," she snapped. "Don't fall for it." George let out a bitter laugh. "The only manipulation happening here is yours." The tension was broken by the crackle of Michael's radio. "Gate C-21 status," a voice asked. Michael pressed the button quickly. "Still handling. Passenger non-compliant." His words were deliberate, painting Maya as the problem. Maya felt the sting of it. With a single phrase, he had tried to reduce her years of service, her stripes, her dignity, into the label of a disruptive passenger. Linda's voice rose above the cabin. "We won't allow this. If you take her off, you'll answer to every one of us who watched the truth unfold." The cabin erupted into a chorus of voices. Some shouted their agreement. Others demanded the officers open their eyes. Phones glowed in every row, capturing the uprising. Daniel's viewer count passed 2,000. Comments screamed across his screen. Passengers standing up for her history live on TikTok. Don't let them win. Maya felt the swell of support around her. For the first time since the confrontation began, she sensed the power had shifted. No longer was she standing alone against Evelyn and Michael. Now the cabin itself had become her ally. And yet, she knew the fight was not over. The officers still held the authority to remove her. The airline could still twist the story later. But the truth was gaining momentum, carried not just by her own words, but by the voices rising around her. Her inner voice whispered again, "You could end this now. You could pull out the card, reveal everything, and silence them." But she resisted. Not yet. Let the divide show itself. Let the world see who stands where when dignity is on the line. The silence returned as Alvarez and Turner exchanged glances. The weight of the passengers' eyes pressed on them, and the hesitation in their stance was clear. Evelyn's confidence cracked, her voice less certain as she said, "You can't just let her stay. You can't." Maya straightened her shoulders, her voice low but unwavering. "The truth is already here. Whether you acknowledge it or not, everyone in this cabin sees it. And soon, so will everyone beyond these walls." The cabin fell silent again. But this time the silence carried a different weight. It was no longer the silence of uncertainty. It was the silence of a divide fully revealed, the quiet before something inevitable broke loose. The air inside the cabin felt electric, like the charged stillness before a thunderstorm cracks open the sky. Captain Maya Johnson stood tall, her composure unshaken, though inside her chest a storm of emotions churned violently. Across from her, Evelyn Carter clung to her authority with desperation, her words losing force but her pride refusing to bend. The passengers had chosen sides, their voices rising in unity against the injustice they witnessed, but the outcome still teetered precariously on the edge of collapse. Officer Luis Alvarez shifted his stance uneasily. He looked at Maya, then back at Evelyn, then at the anxious crowd of passengers pressing forward with their phones raised like torches. His partner, Officer David Turner, adjusted his radio but did not speak. The weight of the decision bore down on them. They had been called to handle a disruption, yet it was clear now that removing Maya would ignite something far greater than a minor cabin disturbance. Richard Bennett's voice rang out once more, sharp with indignation. "You're not just embarrassing her. You're embarrassing yourselves. You're embarrassing this entire airline. Every second you delay this flight, you're showing us your prejudice, not your professionalism." Linda Parker added her voice, strong and unyielding. "This is not about protocol anymore. This is about dignity. And you are stripping it from a woman who has shown more grace than any of you," Evelyn snapped, her voice trembling despite her efforts to steady it. "You think you know better than crew protocol? Do you even understand the risks of letting an imposter into the cockpit?" George Whitman leaned on his cane, his tired but resolute voice cutting through the cabin. "The only risk we face is the blindness of people who cannot see the truth standing in front of them. I fought wars for this country, and I'll be damned if I sit quietly while prejudice parades around in the name of safety." The passengers erupted in applause, their claps echoing against the narrow walls of the cabin. For the first time, Evelyn's face betrayed doubt. Her eyes darted to Michael Harris, silently begging for support. Michael, however, felt his confidence slipping as well. He tugged at his blazer nervously, realizing that the tide had turned against him. Daniel Brooks whispered into his phone, his live stream soaring past 3,000 viewers. His voice trembled with awe. "You guys, this is unreal." They just tried to kick her off, but the passengers are standing up. The whole plane is with her now. This is history. The comments on his screen exploded with outrage and encouragement. "We're with her. Stand strong. Captain, this is bigger than a flight." Some viewers even began tagging news outlets, pushing the live stream beyond the confines of a teenage boy's phone. Maya felt the groundswell of support, but inside she was torn apart by doubt. Was she doing the right thing by letting this unfold? She could end it all with a single move, reveal her position, and silence her detractors. Yet she knew that if she revealed the truth too soon, the deeper lesson might be lost. The ugliness of prejudice needed to be exposed, and it could only be seen clearly if she allowed it to play out. Her inner voice whispered relentlessly, "They're humiliating you. They're dragging your name through the dirt. How much longer can you endure?" Another voice pushed back, "Hold steady. You are not just fighting for yourself. You are fighting for those who will come after you." The silence stretched unbearably long before Alvarez finally spoke. His voice carried both hesitation and weariness. "Ma'am," he said to Maya, "I want to believe you, but I have orders from gate operations. We cannot clear this flight until this matter is resolved." Evelyn seized the moment. "Then remove her." "That's the resolution." "No," Richard snapped immediately. "The resolution is removing you. You are the problem here, not her." The passengers roared in agreement. Dozens of voices overlapped, shouting, clapping, demanding justice. The divide was no longer subtle. The entire cabin had become a chorus against Evelyn and Michael. Maya's chest tightened. The noise around her felt overwhelming, the storm outside and inside colliding. She thought of her father, who once told her, "The hardest battles are the ones you fight silently, in dignity." She wondered now if silence was enough, or if this was the moment to wield her voice like a blade. The radio on Michael's hip crackled again. "Status update. Delay approaching maximum. Resolve immediately." His face paled as he realized the consequences. Delays cost money, and money carried more weight in the airline industry than pride. Still, he pressed forward stubbornly. "We'll handle it. Security is removing the disruptive passenger." That single phrase ignited chaos, Linda shouted, her voice filled with fire. "No, you will not. If you lay a hand on her, you'll have to answer to every one of us." Richard crossed his arms defiantly. "I will not allow it, and neither will the cameras capturing every second of this disgrace." Daniel's voice trembled as he narrated. "They're trying to drag her off. Passengers are blocking them. This is insane. We're at 5,000 viewers now. Phones everywhere glowed as passengers recorded, live-streamed, and posted. The cabin had become a battlefield not of fists but of voices, technology, and truth." Maya raised her hand gently, and the noise subsided. Her calm presence alone commanded silence. She looked at Alvarez, then at Turner, then at Michael. Her voice was soft, but every word carried weight. "You can remove me if you must. You can drag me out in front of all these witnesses, but know this when you do. The world will not remember me as a fraud. They will remember me as a captain who stood in dignity while others stripped themselves of theirs." Her words struck like lightning. The passengers erupted again, clapping, shouting her name, some even chanting, "Captain Johnson, Captain Johnson." Evelyn's face twisted with panic. She had lost control. Michael's jaw clenched as the realization dawned on him that the tide was irreversible. The officers stood frozen, unable to move forward, paralyzed by the force of truth laid bare in front of them. For the first time, Evelyn's voice cracked. "This isn't fair. She doesn't belong here." George slammed his cane against the floor. "She belongs more than you ever will." The words hung heavy, undeniable, final. The cabin reached its breaking point, and then silence. A silence so deep it felt like the air itself had paused to listen. Everyone waited for the next move, for someone to tip the balance and determine the fate of the flight. Maya stood tall, her eyes unwavering. Inside, her heart ached with both fury and hope. The breaking point had arrived, and there was no turning back. The silence inside the cabin stretched unbearably long. Every face was turned toward Captain Maya Johnson. Every breath seemed to weigh on hers. She felt the weight of hundreds of eyes pressing against her, demanding resolution, begging for the truth to shatter the uneasy stalemate. Her heart thudded in her chest like the beating of a drum that only she could hear. Evelyn Carter shifted beside the beverage cart, her confidence now paper-thin. She licked her lips nervously and tried to maintain her posture of authority, but her trembling hands betrayed her. Michael Harris stood rigid, clinging to his radio like a lifeline, though his earlier certainty had dissolved into something closer to fear. Officer Luis Alvarez finally broke the silence. "Ma'am, if you are who you claim to be, is there proof you can present right now?" His voice carried both skepticism and hope, as though he wanted nothing more than for this ordeal to end, but still felt trapped by the procedure he had sworn to follow. Maya inhaled deeply, her chest rising slowly. She had resisted until now, hoping that by enduring, she could expose the prejudice for what it was without relying on her credentials to prove her humanity. But she felt the moment had come. This was not retreat. This was revelation. Her voice was soft, yet steady enough to command the attention of everyone in the cabin. "Yes," she said, "I do." She reached down calmly, fingers brushing against the polished leather of her briefcase. The metallic click of the latch echoed like a gunshot in the hushed cabin. Every passenger leaned closer, their breaths caught, waiting. Evelyn's voice cracked with desperation. "She's faking. She probably has a forged card. Don't let her trick you." "Enough," Richard Bennett snapped, his eyes blazing. "We've had enough of your poison." Maya pulled out a slim leather wallet, carefully opening it to reveal her airline identification card. The card gleamed under the overhead light, the airline's crest embossed in silver, her name and title clear in bold letters, Captain Maya Johnson. Her photograph stared back at them, framed by the unmistakable insignia of authority. Gas rippled through the cabin. Passengers craned their necks to see. Daniel Brooks swung his phone toward the card, capturing it on his live stream. His voice quivered as he narrated, "There it is. Her ID, Captain Maya Johnson. Proof, absolute proof." His viewer count leapt again, past 8,000 in seconds. Linda Parker clapped her hands together once, the sound sharp as a gavel. "There! Now will you all shut your mouths and see the truth?" George Whitman's weary face lit with vindication. "I told you," he said, his voice breaking with both relief and anger. "I told you all." The officers leaned in to examine the card. Alvarez studied it carefully, his brows furrowed. Turner nodded slowly. "This looks official. This matches airline format. I don't see any reason to doubt it." Michael Harris paled, sweat glistening on his brow. He cleared his throat, his voice stumbling. "That could be a fake. We need to verify through operations." "No," Maya said firmly, her voice rising for the first time. "You've had your chance to believe what was plain before your eyes. You ignored my uniform, my stripes, my dignity. Now you have the card, and still you cling to doubt. But the truth does not need your permission to exist. I am Captain Maya Johnson, and I command this flight." The cabin erupted in applause, passengers rising from their seats, clapping and cheering. Some even shouted her name, "Captain Johnson. Captain Johnson." Evelyn's face twisted with panic. She looked from the card to Maya, to the cheering passengers, her world unraveling in real time. This doesn't mean anything," she stammered. "Anyone can print stop." Linda cut her off sharply. "Stop humiliating yourself. You're the fraud here, not her." Daniel's livestream exploded with comments. She proved it. They tried to destroy her but failed. This is going viral. His phone buzzed relentlessly with notifications as more and more people tuned in. Maya felt a surge of conflicting emotions: relief that the truth had been laid bare, anger that it had taken this long, that she had been forced to expose herself when her presence should have been enough, pride that she had stood her ground with dignity, and sorrow that the passengers had to witness such ugliness to see what she had always known. Her inner voice whispered again, "This is what you wanted them to see. Not just your ID, not just your rank, but the prejudice that fought to deny both until it could no longer stand." The officers stepped back. Their posture changed entirely. Alvarez nodded respectfully. "Captain Johnson," he said, his tone different now, almost apologetic. "I see no reason to detain you further," Turner added quietly. "Ma'am, I'm sorry this happened. You shouldn't have had to go through this." Maya inclined her head slightly, her calm composure never wavering. "Thank you. Now let us prepare for departure. These passengers have waited long enough." Evelyn looked around desperately for support, but found none. The passengers' eyes burned with condemnation. Michael's shoulders sagged, his authority evaporating in the face of undeniable truth. Richard Bennett leaned toward Evelyn, his voice low but cutting. "You should be the one escorted off this plane." Linda nodded, and anyone else who thought humiliating this woman was acceptable. The cabin door opened again, this time revealing Catherine Boyd, the station manager. Her sharp eyes took in the scene instantly: the officers, the passengers on their feet, the raised phones, the ID card in Maya's hand. She sensed the storm she had just walked into. "What in the world is going on here?" Catherine demanded. Michael stammered, but no words came. Evelyn opened her mouth, then closed it again. It was Maya who answered, her voice calm but firm. "What's going on is that your crew refused to recognize me as the captain of this flight. They accused me of impersonation, humiliated me in front of passengers, and delayed departure for nearly an hour, all because of prejudice." The words landed like thunder. Passengers shouted their agreement, voices rising in support of Maya. Phones recorded Catherine's every reaction, ready to hold her accountable for whatever came next. For a brief moment, silence reigned again. Catherine looked at Maya, at the card in her hand, at the passengers cheering her name. And in that silence, everyone knew the tide had finally turned. The cabin vibrated with energy, as though the walls themselves carried the weight of what had just happened. Captain Maya Johnson stood steady in the aisle, her airline identification still visible in her hand. The passengers who had endured the confrontation with her now erupted into cheers, their applause echoing through the narrow space like waves crashing against a shore. Evelyn Carter's face drained of color. Her words, once sharp as knives, now fumbled and collapsed under the undeniable evidence in Maya's hand. She gripped the beverage cart as though it could anchor her, but nothing could shield her from the storm of judgment in the eyes of those around her. Michael Harris looked equally broken. Sweat clung to his forehead, his tie loosened, his hand still clutching his radio without purpose. The confidence that had fueled his accusations had evaporated, leaving him standing in silence, his authority dismantled by truth. Catherine Boyd, the station manager, scanned the scene quickly. Her gaze moved from Maya to Evelyn, from the officers to the angry passengers whose phones were raised like witnesses. She knew instantly that this was not a matter she could smooth over with polite words. Whatever had unfolded here was already beyond her control. "Captain Johnson," Catherine said carefully, her voice tinged with both respect and alarm. Let me apologize on behalf of this station. Clearly, a mistake has been made." Maya's eyes narrowed slightly, though her expression remained composed. A mistake. This was more than a mistake. Ms. Boyd. This was an attempt to erase me from my own command. An attempt born not from protocol, but from prejudice. The passengers roared their agreement, some shouting Maya's name, others demanding accountability. Daniel Brooks angled his phone toward Catherine, whispering into his live stream. "She just said it. Prejudice. This is huge. We're at 10,000 viewers right now." Catherine's face tightened. She was a woman skilled in public relations, used to putting out fires before they grew too large. But this was no ordinary flame. This was a wildfire, already spreading beyond the confines of the cabin, fed by the fury of the passengers and the digital storm Daniel had unleashed. Richard Bennett stood, pointing directly at Evelyn. She should be the one escorted off this flight, not the captain. We all saw how she treated her, how she refused to believe what was right in front of her, Linda Parker added, her voice shaking with indignation, and Michael Harris, too. He backed her every step of the way. We will not forget this. None of us will. George Whitman, his cane steady against the floor, lifted his voice with the authority of a man who had spent a lifetime demanding justice. This isn't just about a delayed flight. This is about the kind of world we want to live in. Do we stand by while dignity is stripped away, or do we say no more? Applause thundered again, passengers rising from their seats, some chanting Maya's name, others calling for Evelyn and Michael to be removed. Evelyn's lips trembled. She tried to speak, but only a whisper escaped. I was just doing my job." "No," Linda cut in fiercely. "You were doing your prejudice. There is a difference." Catherine raised her hands in an attempt to quiet the uproar. Please, everyone. I understand your anger. I will personally ensure this incident is investigated thoroughly. But right now, we need to focus on getting this flight underway safely." Maya's voice was calm, yet it carried through the cabin with commanding force. This flight will not move forward until accountability is clear. These passengers have seen enough to know what happened here. If we attempt to sweep it under the rug, the damage will only grow. Daniel's phone buzzed in his hand. He glanced at the screen and whispered urgently, "It's trending. Guys, this hashtag is trending. Justice for Maya is blowing up." The revelation rippled through the cabin like a spark across dry tinder. Passengers began speaking louder, some even standing to record statements, eager to add their voices to the growing movement online. Evelyn shrank back, realizing that the entire world was beginning to watch her downfall in real time. Michael's radio crackled again. "Gate C-21, what's your status? Departure window closing?" His face twisted with dread. If this flight missed its slot, the consequences for him would be severe. He opened his mouth to respond, but Catherine cut him off. "I'll handle this." She turned to Maya, her voice respectful. "Captain Johnson, will you allow us to proceed if I remove Ms. Carter from duty for this flight? We can discuss the rest through official channels once we land." The passengers cheered at the suggestion, their voices unified in support. Evelyn gasped, her hand tightening on the cart. "What, you can't?" "I was protecting this plane." Maya's gaze met Catherine's. Her heart wrestled inside her chest. She wanted more than removal. She wanted change. But she also knew the importance of keeping the flight moving, of getting her passengers safely to their destination. She let the silence linger before speaking. "Yes, but only if it is clear to everyone here that she is being removed for misconduct, not framed as a victim of circumstance. Catherine nodded slowly. Agreed. The officer stepped forward. Alvarez's voice was quiet but firm. Ms. Carter, please gather your things. You're being relieved of duty. Evelyn shook her head violently. No, this isn't fair. I was right. I know I was right. George's cane struck the floor again. No, you were wrong, and fairness is finally catching up to you. Tears welled in Evelyn's eyes as the reality sank in. The passengers' phones captured every step as she was gently guided down the aisle, her once commanding posture broken, her whispers drowned by the chorus of voices that condemned her. Michael looked as if he might collapse under the weight of it all. Catherine turned her gaze to him. And you, Mr. Harris, will remain at this gate. You'll answer for your role as well. The passengers erupted again, some clapping, others simply breathing sighs of relief. Maya finally allowed herself a long, steady breath. The revelation had brought consequences, but it had also exposed wounds far deeper than one confrontation. She felt the ache of it in her bones. Her inner voice spoke again. This is not the end. This is only the beginning. As Evelyn disappeared down the jet bridge and Michael stood frozen in shame. Maya looked around at her passengers. Their eyes shone with pride, with gratitude, with the fierce solidarity that had risen when dignity was threatened. She knew then that this flight would not simply be a journey through the skies. It had already become something larger. A statement, a stand, a breaking of silence that could no longer be ignored. The roar of applause had not yet faded when Evelyn Carter disappeared down the jet bridge, her shoulders hunched in defeat. Michael Harris lingered at the door, his head bowed, a man caught in the wreckage of his own arrogance. Catherine Boyd's voice cut through the charged atmosphere, calm but firm. Ladies and gentlemen, I want to thank you for your patience. We will resume boarding preparations immediately. This flight will depart shortly under the command of Captain Maya Johnson. The announcement was met with cheers, louder than before, almost jubilant. Passengers clapped, some even whistled, and a wave of relief rolled through the cabin. For the first time since the confrontation began, the air seemed breathable again. Maya felt the energy around her like a current. Yet inside she remained still. She had won this battle, but the victory felt complicated. Pride sat alongside exhaustion, and beneath both, a simmering sadness that it had required such turmoil for the truth to be acknowledged. Her eyes swept the cabin. Linda Parker caught her gaze and mouthed a simple thank you, her expression one of profound respect. Richard Bennett gave her a nod of solidarity, his jaw set like a man still unwilling to forgive what he had witnessed. George Whitman leaned back in his seat, weary but satisfied, the lines on his face etched deeper by both anger and relief. Daniel Brooks, still gripping his phone, whispered breathlessly into the camera. You saw it. Everyone. You saw the truth come out. We're about to take off with Captain Johnson in command. This isn't just a flight anymore. This is history. His live stream count ticked upward past 12,000, the numbers climbing relentlessly. Maya turned toward Catherine. Ensure that the cabin crew is informed of my position. I won't have any further confusion. Catherine nodded. Understood. Captain, I'll speak to the crew immediately. The remaining flight attendants, who had watched the confrontation unfold with visible discomfort, now approached Maya. Their expressions carried a mix of shame and relief. One of them, a younger attendant with trembling hands, spoke quietly. Captain Johnson, I'm sorry we didn't speak sooner. We should have. Maya regarded her for a long moment before answering. Silence can wound as deeply as words. Remember that. The attendant nodded, her eyes wet with regret. With order restored, the officers stepped aside, satisfied that their role was complete. Alvarez leaned in slightly toward Maya. Captain, for what it's worth, I admire how you handled this. Not many would have kept their composure the way you did. Composure is my duty, Maya replied simply, though the words felt heavier than they sounded. Soon. Catherine signaled the crew to prepare for departure. The cabin doors were secured, the safety checks resumed, and the familiar hum of the engine stirred beneath the floor. Yet the flight felt different now. Every passenger seemed more awake, more connected. Their glances toward Maya filled not only with respect, but with a sense of belonging to something larger than themselves. Maya took her seat in the cockpit. The smooth leather felt both familiar and strangely new after what had transpired. Her co-pilot, Captain Andrew Miller, turned toward her with a quiet smile. Quite a welcome back. Maya exhaled slowly, her hands resting on the controls. It shouldn't have come to this, but now that it has, we'll carry them safely to their destination. Always, Miller replied. The tower cleared them for departure. As the aircraft taxied to the runway, the cabin remained unusually silent. It was as though every passenger was holding the moment with reverence, aware they were part of something unforgettable. Maya's hands moved with steady precision as she guided the jet down the runway. The engines roared, the wheels lifted, and soon they soared into the night sky, leaving the chaos of the ground behind. At 30,000 feet, the seatbelt signs dimmed. Conversations began to ripple again, though they carried a different tone now. Instead of idle chatter, the voices were weighted with reflection. Richard Bennett leaned across the aisle toward Linda Parker. I've flown more times than I can count, but I've never seen anything like that. We witnessed something ugly, yes, but also something powerful. Linda nodded. Prejudice tried to write her out of her own story, and she refused. That's courage. That's the kind of strength this world needs. George Whitman joined softly, his voice tired but firm. It's the kind of strength that reminds us our fight isn't over. Not for any of us. Prejudice never dies quietly. It has to be defeated again and again. Daniel, still glued to his phone, whispered into his stream, Guys, we're in the air. Captain Johnson is flying us now. She's the real deal. The comments are blowing up. They're calling her a hero. He paused, his youthful face sobering. Honestly, I think they're right. In the cockpit, Maya sat in silence. The sky stretched endlessly before her. Stars scattered across the darkness like watchful eyes. Her hands were steady on the yoke, but her mind wrestled with thoughts she could not silence. Her inner voice pressed. They doubted you until the last possible second. They stripped your dignity piece by piece until you were forced to show proof. Does truth only matter when stamped and laminated? Another voice, quieter but stronger, answered, You endured. You showed them that strength is not loud, not cruel, but calm and unbreakable. You reminded them that dignity cannot be erased. Maya closed her eyes briefly, steadying her breath. She thought of her father's words, of the long line of those who had fought battles both seen and unseen. Tonight, she had added her name to that line. Hours passed, the hum of the engine steady, the cabin lights dimmed, yet the energy aboard the plane had not faded. Passengers continued to whisper about what they had witnessed, their conversations weaving a collective story that would outlast the flight itself. When the flight attendants came through with refreshments, passengers greeted them with unusual warmth. It was as if everyone aboard had been bonded by the trial they had endured together, united by the injustice they had witnessed and the strength that had overcome it. Maya remained focused on her instruments, her posture calm, her voice steady as she communicated with air traffic control, but beneath the surface, her heart carried both the burden of the ordeal and the quiet fire of resolve. She knew this was not over. When they landed, questions would be asked, reports filed, reputations examined. The world beyond this cabin would demand answers. Yet she also knew something else. No matter what the airline said, no matter what the headlines read, every person on this plane had seen the truth with their own eyes. And the truth had a way of traveling farther than any flight could carry. As the hours slipped by and the plane cut across the dark sky, Maya felt the weight of both victory and responsibility settle onto her shoulders. She was not only the captain of this flight, she had become, whether she wanted it or not, a symbol, and symbols could not rest. The night sky slowly paled to a bruised gray as the jet descended through the first layers of dawn. After hours of steady flight, the cabin stirred with quiet anticipation. Seatbacks lifted, blankets folded, conversations tapered off. Yet beneath the calm routines of landing, the air buzzed with tension. Everyone aboard knew that the true reckoning lay not in the journey, but in what awaited them once the wheels touched the ground. Captain Maya Johnson adjusted the controls with the fluid ease of long experience. Her co-pilot, Captain Andrew Miller, monitored the instruments beside her. Their voices exchanged calmly over the radio. Yet Maya's mind wandered to the storm outside these steel walls, the reporters who might be waiting, the executives scrambling to contain a story already racing ahead of them. Her inner voice whispered, sharp and steady, "They doubted you. They stripped your dignity. They will try to soften this, to frame it as a misunderstanding. Will you let them?" Maya's jaw tightened. Not this time. The landing gear thudded into place. The runway lights stretched ahead like a path carved through darkness. Maya guided the jet down with a steady hand, the tires kissing the asphalt with practiced grace. A ripple of relief ran through the cabin as the engines roared and slowed. They had arrived, but the silence that followed was heavy. Passengers exchanged glances, their minds already racing ahead to what they might see beyond the jet bridge. "Ladies and gentlemen," Maya's voice carried over the intercom, calm but weighted with meaning. "Welcome to New York. On behalf of the crew, thank you for your patience and courage tonight. You've been part of something larger than a flight, and I believe none of us will forget it." Applause broke out again, softer this time, more reverent than jubilant. Some passengers dabbed their eyes. Others clasped the hands of those beside them. As the plane taxied toward the gate, Daniel Brooks whispered into his phone, "We're here. The captain just landed us. Guys, we're at 20,000 viewers. People are calling this the flight that changed everything." His young voice trembled with awe. In the aisle, Richard Bennett leaned forward, speaking low to Linda Parker and George Whitman. "You know there'll be cameras waiting. They'll want our stories. We can't let them twist this." George tapped his cane firmly against the floor. "Let them try. We'll speak the truth." The aircraft halted at the gate. The seatbelt sign chimed off, but no one rushed to stand. Instead, there was a hushed expectancy, as if everyone sensed that stepping off this plane meant stepping into history. The door opened with a hiss. Bright terminal lights spilled inside, along with the unmistakable presence of waiting officials. Two airline managers stood flanked by public relations staff. their polished suits stiff under the fluorescent glow. Security officers lingered nearby, and beyond them, a throng of cameras and microphones jostled restlessly. Maya rose from her seat in the cockpit and stepped into the aisle. A murmur swept through the passengers as she appeared, her presence commanding without effort. Some raised their phones again, capturing the moment. Catherine Boyd, who had flown ahead by phone to prepare for this arrival, met Maya at the door. Her expression was taut. Every word she spoke measured. "Captain Johnson, the airline's senior representatives would like to speak with you immediately." Maya's eyes swept past her to the press gathered beyond security. "I'm sure they would," she said evenly. The first passengers began to disembark, but not before pausing to address Maya. Linda Parker squeezed her hand gently. "Don't let them spin this, Captain. We've got your back." Richard Bennett nodded firmly. "We'll speak out. Whatever they try, the world already knows the truth." George Whitman's weathered face softened with pride. "You did more than fly us tonight. You stood for every one of us, one by one." Passengers offered their words of solidarity as they filed out, many making certain to glance toward the waiting cameras, ready to testify. Daniel was among the last to leave, his phone still broadcasting. "Captain, you're a hero. Everyone's saying it. Hashtag Justice for Maya is trending #1 worldwide." His youthful grin wavered into something more serious. "Don't let them silence you." When the final passengers had stepped off, Maya walked toward the exit. Catherine's voice followed her. "Captain, they want to meet in private." Maya paused, her shoulders square, her gaze steady. "No, not private. They tried to humiliate me in public. They will answer in public." The cameras surged as she appeared at the jet bridge. Flashes lit her face. Microphones pushed forward. Voices called her name. Reporters shouted over each other. "Captain Johnson, what happened on that flight? Were you really accused of impersonation? Do you believe this was racially motivated?" Maya lifted her chin, the hum of voices falling as she spoke. "What happened tonight was not a misunderstanding. It was prejudice. I was accused, doubted, and humiliated for no reason other than the color of my skin. I endured it because I had to. But no one should have to prove their worthiness to exist where they already belong." The crowd erupted with questions, but her words rang clear. Passengers behind her began to speak up, their voices cutting through the chaos. Linda, Richard, and George each stepped forward, their testimonies echoing Maya's truth. Daniel's live stream captured it all, his comments section flooding with messages of support and outrage. The airline managers exchanged uneasy glances, their carefully prepared statements faltering in the face of such unified defiance. They attempted to usher Maya away, but the passengers' voices rose louder, demanding accountability, refusing to let the moment be smoothed over. Inside, Maya's heart pounded, but her face remained calm. She knew this was only the beginning. The airline would attempt to contain it. Executives would scramble. Lawyers would prepare statements. Yet she also knew that the truth had already flown farther than any jet could carry. Her inner voice spoke once more. "They tried to erase you. Instead, you became unignorable." And as she stood in the glare of cameras, her passengers at her side, Maya understood that this landing was not an ending. It was a reckoning. The conference room at the terminal was sterile, bright, and cold. Its walls gleamed with corporate polish, adorned with framed photographs of smiling crews and happy passengers. Yet the air inside felt heavy, thick with the kind of tension that no air conditioner could clear. Captain Maya Johnson sat at the long glass table, her posture straight, her hands folded neatly in front of her. Her uniform bore the calm dignity of someone who knew both the responsibility of command and the burden of scrutiny. She had flown thousands of passengers across countless miles, but never had she felt the weight of eyes pressing on her the way they did now. Across the table sat three executives from Atlantic Skies Airlines. Anthony Rivera, the CFO, leaned forward with a practiced expression of empathy that didn't quite reach his eyes. Beside him, a public relations director tapped furiously on her tablet, no doubt monitoring the firestorm online. Another vice president scrolled through his phone, grimacing at each update. Catherine Boyd hovered near the door, arms crossed, as though she could hold the room together with sheer will. She glanced at Maya with something that looked like quiet admiration, though her role still tethered her to the company. Anthony Rivera cleared his throat. "Captain Johnson, first let me thank you for completing the flight safely under such unusual circumstances. Safety, after all, is our top priority." Maya's eyes narrowed, though her face remained calm. Safety was never in question. What was in question was whether my authority as captain would be recognized. It was stripped from me the moment I was doubted without cause. The PR director interjected quickly, her tone rehearsed. "We acknowledge that an incident occurred, and we're committed to a thorough investigation. For now, we ask that you refrain from making public statements until we've had the chance to review all details. The press can be volatile." Maya's voice carried steady resolve. "The press is not volatile. The truth is not volatile. What is volatile is the prejudice that tried to remove me from my own flight." The words cut through the room like glass shattering. The vice president shifted uncomfortably. The PR director froze mid-swipe, and Anthony Rivera leaned back, his jaw tightening. "Captain," Rivera said carefully, "I understand your frustration, but I urge you to consider the larger picture. This airline has a reputation to maintain. The way this story unfolds will affect thousands of jobs, billions in revenue. We cannot afford for this to become a scandal." Maya's composure held, but her voice sharpened. "It already is a scandal. You cannot hide the truth when 1,200 phones recorded it and 20,000 people watched it live. The world knows what happened. The question is not whether you can contain it. The question is whether you will confront it with honesty." For a long moment, silence pressed in. The hum of the air vent was the only sound. Finally, Rivera sighed, his mask slipping. "Do you realize the kind of damage control we're facing investors are calling? Unions are demanding answers. The hashtag with your name is everywhere. We are hanging by a thread." Maya leaned forward slightly. "Then choose the thread that doesn't strangle you. Stand on the side of truth." Catherine spoke softly from the corner. "He's right. Anthony. The passengers have already given statements. The video is everywhere. If we appear to minimize this, we'll only feed the outrage." The PR director shook her head. "We can redirect the narrative, emphasize confusion at the gate, an unfortunate misunderstanding. Frame Evelyn Carter as overzealous in following procedure. Shift the focus away from race." Maya's voice rose, low but thunderous. "No, you will not strip this of its truth to make it palatable. What happened was not confusion. It was not a misunderstanding. It was prejudice. If you erase that word, you erase me." The intensity in her eyes silenced the room. Rivera rubbed his temples. "You're asking us to admit to discrimination, publicly. Do you understand the legal consequences?" "The lawsuits, the settlements," Maya interrupted, her voice like steel. "Do you understand the human consequences if you don't? Every black pilot, every woman in uniform, Every passenger who has ever been treated as less will see what choice you make here. You will either choose integrity or cowardice. There is no middle ground." The weight of her words hung heavy. Rivera looked down, his hands clenched. The PR director finally set her tablet aside, her face pale. Catherine stepped closer to the table. "Captain Johnson is right. I was there. I saw it. The passengers saw it. If we fail to acknowledge it, we lose not just their trust, but our soul as an airline." Maya let the silence linger, then added, her voice quiet but unyielding, "This company is only as strong as the dignity it protects. Tonight, you tried to take mine. You will not take my silence, too." For a moment, no one spoke. Then the vice president, who had said nothing until now, finally muttered, almost reluctantly, "She's right. The footage is everywhere. We can't bury this. The only way forward is through it." Rivera's shoulders slumped. His polished mask cracked, replaced by weariness. This is bigger than I imagined." Maya straightened, her uniform crisp under the harsh lights. "It was always this big. You just refused to see it until the world forced you to." The door opened suddenly, and Rebecca Shaw, the airline's legal counsel, stepped inside. Her sharp gaze swept the room. "I've reviewed the situation," she said, "and the captain is correct. We cannot suppress this. Any attempt to do so will only increase liability. Our best course of action is transparency and accountability." Rivera looked at her, stunned. "Even legally, especially legally," Shaw replied firmly. "If we stand with the captain, we may face lawsuits. If we stand against her, we will face ruin." Maya rose to her feet, her chair sliding back silently across the polished floor. Her voice was steady, but it carried the power of command. "Then the decision is yours. I've done my duty. Now do yours." She turned toward the door, her stride unhurried, her presence unshaken. Every pair of eyes followed her, the weight of her words still pressing into their bones. She knew the battle was not over, but she also knew she had forced the truth into the open. And once truth takes flight, it cannot be grounded. Morning sunlight streamed through the tall glass windows of the airline's headquarters, washing the lobby in gold. Outside, reporters still swarmed, their cameras trained on every entrance, their voices filling the air with questions that refused to die down. Inside, Captain Maya Johnson walked with the same calm stride she had carried through every storm. She was tired, more tired than she could remember, but her resolve glowed stronger than fatigue. Each step felt heavier, yes, but also truer, as if the ground beneath her honored the weight of what she had carried. The airline had called a press conference. Executives, lawyers, and PR officials had spent the night crafting statements, shifting language, and debating strategy. But Maya knew the truth could not be dressed in euphemisms. It had to stand unclothed, raw, and undeniable. She entered the conference room where dozens of reporters sat poised, microphones and cameras aligned like an army. Anthony Rivera sat at the center of the stage, his tie slightly askew, his face betraying the sleepless night. Beside him were Rebecca Shaw and Catherine Boyd, their expressions taut but steady. Maya took her place at the table. For a moment, the room buzzed with the hum of whispers and the rustle of notes. Then silence fell, charged and expectant. Rivera spoke first, his voice subdued. "Thank you for joining us. Last night, on Flight 227, an incident occurred that has shaken not only our passengers, but also the very foundation of our airline. We are here today to speak openly about what happened and how we intend to move forward." Reporters leaned forward, pens poised. Rivera glanced at Maya, then continued, Captain Maya Johnson, who has served this airline with distinction, was wrongfully challenged and humiliated by one of our flight attendants. This was not a misunderstanding. It was discrimination, and it was unacceptable. Gas rippled through the room. The admission was blunt, unvarnished, far from the polished spin many had expected. Cameras flashed like lightning. Rivera's voice thickened with something almost like remorse. We will not hide from this truth. We will confront it. The flight attendant responsible has been terminated. The managers who failed to act have been placed under review, and beginning today, we are launching a comprehensive initiative to address systemic bias within every level of this company. Reporters' hands shot up, but Rivera lifted a hand. But before we take questions, I believe the person most deserving of this platform is the one who lived it. Captain Johnson. The room turned to Maya. She rose slowly, the weight of dozens of lenses fixed upon her. Her heart thudded, not with fear, but with the gravity of the moment. Her voice was steady, carrying the resonance of command. What happened on that plane was not an isolated act. It was part of a larger truth that prejudice can appear even in the skies, in the uniforms meant to symbolize safety and trust. Last night, I was asked to prove that I belonged where I already was. That is not a question of protocol. That is a question of race. The room was utterly still. Even the scratch of pens had ceased. I endured it because I had to. Maya continued, because every passenger on that flight depended on me to rise above it. But let me be clear, no one should have to endure that. Not a captain, not a passenger, not anyone. Her eyes swept the room, her voice deepening with quiet fire. This is bigger than me. It is about every person who has been doubted, dismissed, or diminished because of how they look. It is about dismantling the prejudice that hides behind procedure, that disguises itself as confusion. And it is about demanding a world where dignity is not conditional. For a moment, her composure wavered just enough for her humanity to shine through. My father once told me that dignity is like altitude. You must guard it fiercely, for turbulence will always try to shake it from you. Last night, prejudice tried to strip my altitude, but with the passengers' courage and the truth on our side, we climbed higher instead. The room erupted. Applause thundered from reporters, from staff, even from executives who had once resisted. Some stood, clapping until their hands reddened. Cameras flashed wildly, capturing a moment that felt less like a press conference and more like a turning point. Rebecca Shaw stepped forward, her lawyerly reserve softening into something personal. We cannot undo what happened, but we can change what happens next. Captain Johnson has reminded us that justice must not only be spoken, but lived. Catherine Boyd nodded, her eyes glistening, and lived every single day. Questions began to fly, reporters asking about lawsuits, passengers' testimonies, future reforms, but the answers no longer mattered as much as the truth that had already filled the room. By the time Maya stepped outside into the sunlight, the crowd of supporters had grown. Passengers from Flight 227 stood there, waiting. Linda Parker, Richard Bennett, George Whitman, and even young Daniel Brooks were among them. They cheered as she appeared, their voices mingling with chants from strangers who had watched the live stream. Daniel, still gripping his phone, shouted, "Captain Johnson, over 100,000 people are watching live right now. They're calling you the Sky Captain of Justice." His grin was wide, his eyes shining. Maya smiled faintly, shaking her head, but her heart warmed, not because of the nickname, but because she knew the truth had taken flight beyond her control, beyond the airline's walls, beyond the runway. Richard clasped her shoulder. "You didn't just land a plane last night. You landed hope," Linda added softly, "and we'll keep it flying." Maya looked out over the sea of faces, passengers, supporters, strangers bound together by a shared moment of clarity. She felt both humbled and strengthened, as though she were no longer carrying the burden alone. For a long moment, she let the sunlight wash over her, breathing it in deeply. Then, with quiet certainty, she spoke to the crowd. "This is only the beginning. We will keep climbing, all of us." And with that, the chants rose louder, the cameras flashed brighter, and the story of one night on Flight 227 transformed into a legacy far greater than the sum of its parts. Captain Maya Johnson walked forward, no longer just a pilot, but a symbol, a reminder that dignity, once defended, can never again be denied. And so, Flight 227 landed not only on the runway, but in history. What began as an act of humiliation became a spark for truth. What was meant to silence Captain Maya Johnson only amplified her voice. In standing tall, she reminded us that dignity is not negotiable, and justice is never optional. The story leaves us with heavy questions. How many others have been dismissed, doubted, or diminished in silence? How often has prejudice worn the disguise of procedure? And how long will it take before we all stand, not just for ourselves, but for one another? This is more than a story about an airline. It is about every place where respect is tested, every room where someone is told they don't belong, every heart that has carried the weight of being judged before being known. May we carry with us the courage Maya showed. May we challenge the voices that belittle and honor the truth that uplifts. If this story moved, you share it. If it made you reflect like it. And if you want more stories that pierce through silence with truth, subscribe now. Together, we can keep these voices alive until justice no longer needs to fight to be heard.